the next best way to live longer is calorie restriction, often referred to as CR. If we humans reduce our calorie intake by 30%, we can extend our life expectancy by 30%. Melanie Avalon is our next speaker, and she is a SAG-AFTRA. She is a top health influencer. She is a top Apple app creator. I've never met one before. The app is Food Sense Guide.
It's kind of crazy that we know how many calories we're burning. We make it into a math equation that I think just doesn't quite pan out because there's so many factors at play as far as calorie composition, our metabolism, our activity levels. When you switch into the fasted mode and your body starts burning your own fat for fuel, you switch into a state of ketosis, you're burning ketones, you now have access to so much energy that you're not hungry. It's really ironic because you think that when you're fasting, it's a deficit of energy, but really it's an abundance of energy because most of us store thousands and thousands of calories just waiting to be burned on our body.
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better. Well, actually, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms. Melanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Chris, thank you so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to this. I'm excited.
Right, cool. So you are an actor, which is not the normal starting place for a health expert, right? Can you give us a brief history of your health journey? What led you to this point of having 3.5 million yearly downloads of your podcast?
Sure. So yes, I always was doing acting growing up. I went to film and theater school at USC in LA, and I fell into the diet world. Well, first of all, I was always trying lots of different diets to lose weight, as many people are. And when I first discovered the low carb approach, that was the first time that I realized that changing what I ate not only helped me lose weight, but affected so many other things, my health, my energy. And that's when I became really obsessed with the science of diet. I'm no longer low carb, but that's what really started me on that journey. And then from there, I found, because kind of related to the low carb world, I found my way into the keto world and then the fasting. And one day I read this blog post. This was forever ago, but it was called, this was before Facebook and all of that stuff. And it was like eat one meal a day to lose weight. And it was a website page. It had like 300 comments. And I was like, I'm just going to try this for a week and see what happens. And I never stopped. And that was over a decade ago. And I found that by optimizing my food choices, fasting, I found the paleo world and eating whole foods, that I really could finally support my body composition to a way that I liked aesthetically for being on camera, and got to finally enjoy food again. I wasn't like dieting all the time. And I just became obsessed with the science of everything. And then tangential to all of that, I also got some health issues with mold exposure and GI upset and fatigue. And that led me down the rabbit hole of trying to find different health things and quote biohacking things before it was called biohacking to really optimize my health. And it all just kind of like came together to where I am now, which is podcasting and doing all the biohacking and just loving what I experience and wanting to share it with everybody.
That's awesome. So you talked about, one of the things that you have to worry about that I think the general public doesn't worry about in these terms, which is like camera ready, right? And I think we have this impression that camera ready is a struggle, and it sounds like you just found a way that it was at a minimum less of a struggle, if not even not a struggle at all.
Yeah, so because basically, and of course, like camera ready, what does that even mean? And I'm all about like accepting all body types, and so it's nothing about that, but just for the shape and the image that I personally was going for and wanted to be. Prior to fasting, paleo, all of that stuff, I was, just having to do crazy dieting and restriction. And with fasting, I finally could just eat all I wanted in my eating window and fast during the day. I had more energy. Like I didn't have the energy swings. It was all really great. And actually, the reason I wrote my book originally, because I self-published it, and it was because I went through a period of time for like 6 months where I was doing background work on basically like every TV set known to mankind. And so I was meeting new people every single day and also being in the lunch. Like, so basically on set, they have like lunch where everybody goes to lunch, and I would be like not eating. And people would always ask me why. And I was always getting to talk about the benefits of fasting. And finally, one day I was like, I should just write a book so I can just be like, here, read this, because it was like, it was like a lot. It was like the same conversation over and over and over.
This looks like a very introvert approach, right? Like, yes, I enjoy interacting with people, but it does drain me. So just read this and then we can chat about it later.
Yeah, for like follow-up questions and all the science. So, yeah.
So I did mention, right, in this opening, the humorous starve yourself 1/3 to death diet. Have you ever tried like full on, 1/3 calorie restriction for any extended period of time?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about that. So I mean, the consistent diet thing I would try when I was dieting before fasting, before paleo, was just calorie restriction. Honestly, it's been so long that I don't know how many calories I was actually counting or doing. But that was always the thing, it was like logging all the food, like how many calories are you burning? How many can you eat? And like, that should work. And the crazy thing is, like, it doesn't typically work that well. At least not in my experience. It didn't. Just as far as like actually sustaining it, and actually like, it's kind of crazy that we know how many calories we're burning. We make it into a math equation that I think just doesn't quite pan out, because there's so many factors at play as far as calorie composition, our metabolism, our activity levels, NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Wait. Yeah.
Sounds right.
So yeah, there's just so many factors that boiling down to a math equation is less than ideal sometimes.
Well, and NEAT is something that's actually relatively new on my radar and just makes perfect sense. And for those of you want to describe what NEAT is, like what is that?
Yeah. So non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's basically the amount of calories that you burn every day that are not from conscious, like on purpose exercise. So it's all of just the movement you do, the fidgeting, if you're doing you're vacuuming, when you're running errands, it's all of that movement. And what's crazy about it is that it's so different in different people. So some people have very minimal NEAT, like their body doesn't really burn. They just naturally don't burn a lot of calories beyond their basic metabolism, and then their concentrated exercise. Some people, it's like crazy. So they've done studies, and it can be up to 1,000 calories difference in given individuals from NEAT. So it can also explain why some people, will really radically change their, like they'll eat a lot and they won't seem to gain weight. It could be because their NEAT just like ramps up accordingly. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and so you would potentially find yourself, and I'm reading a book now. Actually, I have an interview with the author Matt Gallant tomorrow, and some of what it's talking about.
Bioptimizers.
Yeah, he's awesome, and the book is amazing. He just came out. I don't know if you know, he just came out with the Nutrition Bible, and I'm like 3 chapters into it. It's amazing.
I was taking pictures with it right before this.
Oh, really?
I was holding it. Yeah, because I have to stock up
math,
for Instagram.
From a standpoint of if you're going to weigh a book, like it's worth it already. Like it's worth it. You're getting a workout just turning the pages. Like that's the reality. And one of the things it talks about early on is, like you may be depriving yourself of calories, increasing your calorie output through exercise or whatever. And then you just start twitching less, or you just start sitting on the couch more. And these are so subtle that you don't recognize that you're doing them, but your body's actually shutting down those features because like, hey, we're in starvation mode. We need to be very conscious of our calories. And so we're just not going to do all of those things anymore. And again, that wasn't on my radar now, and it makes perfect sense. So I interviewed Ben Greenfield yesterday, and he was on a treadmill. He often is on a treadmill. So, I mean, that's the opposite. That's kind of forcefully keeping you at an excited state when it comes to from the concept of NEAT, right?
Yeah. No, just to comment on that really quickly. So that the fidgeting, like that's a perfect example. And I think apparently some people's bodies just naturally will do that more and other people's won't. And so it's pretty individual. It's pretty cool.
As well as the potential for you to change based on what you're consuming. Like that, I mean, it just really is I don't know, like a game changer piece of the puzzle, right? Because I think I've heard people say, "Oh, we've proven that the calorie in, calorie out is not real," and I'm like, I don't really remember that announcement, but this is associated with it, right? The calories in, calories out. If you're only counting exercise and you're not counting NEAT, can be dramatic. Like you said, 1,000 calories different is significant, right? That's huge.
And it is still calories in, calories out. Like, that's not changing. It's just there's so many factors that affect the calories out part. So like the calories in is pretty like consistent because it's whatever you put in. But the calories out, so many factors.
Yeah, absolutely. So some alternatives to the I think we've agreed the starve yourself 1/3 to death diet. Not really for most of us. Out there, we've got intermittent fasting. We've got time restricted eating. That's IF and TRE. What are the pros and cons of each of those, and how would you say those impact health and potentially longevity?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, there are people that, like in the Calorie Restriction Society, I think it's called, they do like concentrated calorie restriction for like all the time. So more power to them. But
or less power, as probably is true.
I know. I guess it depends. So, which relates to your question. And so you talked about this in the intro, but so consistently calorie restriction in the dietary world has been the thing in animal models and humans that has been shown to increase lifespan pretty consistently. The issues are that it's not very sustainable for most people, not always feasible. There are concerns about getting adequate nutrition. Something I'm personally concerned about is getting enough protein. I think that can be really hard with a calorie restriction approach like that. So intermittent fasting has increasingly more and more become more popular. There's debates and they're still studying, is it activating like the exact same pathways as calorie restriction? Is it slightly different? Is there overlap? But in any case, it seems to activate pretty much essentially very similar in the same pathways as calorie restriction. So you're getting the anti-aging benefits, the longevity benefits, but you're not having to do that chronic restriction. And there are a lot of different approaches, like you mentioned them. And I think this is actually one of the issues in the literature is that there's not like especially the word intermittent fasting is kind of vague. Kind of covers a lot of different options. Even time restricted feeding and time restricted eating is kind of vague. And like, I consider time restricted eating and feeding intermittent fasting. Like, I consider them the same thing, but for some definitions. So intermittent fasting basically is engaging in concentrated hours where you are fasting and then eating. And time restricted feeding, time restricted eating, very similar as well. It typically, but it's more doing it consistently and eating in hour time windows every day. And again, the definitions are debated. There's also things like different types of fasting, like alternate day fasting. So that's where people are often alternating days of eating a lot and then either complete fasting or severe calorie restriction on the fasting days. So, it might be like 500 calories on those days. There's things like the 5-2 diet where like 2 days a week you are doing that fasting approach. There's fasting mimicking diet. I just interviewed Dr. Valter Longo again, and he created that, which is basically a 5-day program where you eat a severely calorie restricted, low protein, low carb, almost low everything. I guess technically it's high fat, but it's so low calorie that it's not even high fat meal, and it's all plant-based, and it stimulates all of the physiological states of fasting while you're still eating a little bit. And it basically is giving you the benefits of an extended fast, so like a multi-day fast while still eating. And then extended fasting would be, fasting for multiple days. So there are, I'm trying to think if there's any more. I mean, I'm sure there's more, but there's a lot of approaches. Like I do the 1 meal a day approach. So I don't actually count the hours or look at the clock. I just eat my 1 meal every day. So that's what I do.
Do you do, okay, so there's so much to unwrap and then also kind of to ask you really what you're doing. So do you typically have a lunch, typically have a dinner, or is that just change based on social situation, change based on opportunity?
Yeah. So going back to when I said I was going to try this, forever go for a week, I decided I've never been a breakfast person. Like I'm not hungry when I wake up. I'm a big dinner person. Like I love dinner. What I don't like And what I didn't like when I was always dieting normally is having to stop eating. Like I don't like I want to just be able to like eat all I want. So I wanted to do dinner only, and that's what I started with, and that's what I've been doing for over a decade now. So I just eat dinner every night, and it works really great because socially, dinner tends to be the social, outing. So I can still do all the social things. I get to eat all I want at night, and then I go to bed. I know people say you're supposed to wait like 3 hours before going to bed, but I don't do that. And I love it. It works really, really well for me.
So it sounds like, and this is kind of my feeling, and we'll bounce this idea back and forth. You're talking about, hey, doing 500 calories as a way to kind of mimic a longer term fast and still getting to eat. And this is it feels like it keeps coming back to this mental piece, right? Like, oh, I'm fasting, but I get to eat, so it's not so bad. Or, I get to eat. You just described, I didn't like stopping eating, right? So this is very much a mental piece. I've always felt, since I started doing intermittent fasting, I don't know, I've been doing it maybe a year and a half, 2 years, something like that, that the mindset about intermittent fasting is extremely different, right? So anytime I've dieted before, it's this, counting calories. And I never thought of it in terms of, like you did, of like, I just don't want to stop eating, right? I just felt on any diet like hunger was the enemy, right? Like, damn this hunger because I can't eat enough calories at this meal or that meal or whatever, or throughout the day. And with intermittent fasting, it's kind of the opposite. Like, I'm hungry. Yes. Like, that's the goal. Like, it's fasting. You're supposed to be hungry. And so it's no longer the enemy of the experience. It's the goal of the experience. I don't know if that applies to kind of your approach or any approaches you've heard before.
Yeah. So, okay, I have thoughts on this. Before fasting, I was kind of defined by this sense of constant hunger because when I wasn't eating, I was looking forward to my next meal or my next snack. So I was hungry. And then when I was eating, I still felt hungry, and I kind of felt perpetually hungry because I knew I didn't get to eat all that I wanted. So it was kind of just like always hungry, not in a good way. Now with fasting, yes and no. So I agree with you in that like hunger is no longer the enemy, which is like an amazing mindset reframe. Definitely an amazing mindset reframe. The great thing about fasting is that when you switch into the fasted mode and your body, starts burning your own fat for fuel, you switch into a state of ketosis, you're burning ketones, you now have access to so much energy that you're not hungry. So it's really ironic because prior to fasting, you think that when you're fasting that it's a deficit of energy, but really it's an abundance of energy because, most of us store thousands and thousands of calories just waiting to be burned on our body. So when you're in the fasted state, appetite actually for most people like goes away. Like you're just not hungry, which is amazing. So you lose the fear of hunger and then you don't even have to feel hunger, which is really great.
Yeah, I feel like, there is a period throughout the day where you may get hungry and then it does tend to go away. And this is really in the early stages. And now I may be getting hungry coming into, I tend to eat my first meal at 3, and I may be getting hungry, I don't know, at 2, maybe 1:30. But that's no big deal because I'm about to eat like an hour and a half away. I'm going to eat. And so really for me is it feels like a quantum shift. And your point is, okay, not only is it hunger is the goal, I'm just less hungry. And from an evolutionary standpoint, when we're at a calorie deficit, right, our bodies are going, okay, you need to be ready to catch or find something. You need to be mentally alert so you can catch or find something. And you need to have the energy to run or jump or whatever, or, climb a tree to get something. And so your actually energy does go up and your mental focus does go up. And that's why I think people talk about having more focus and more energy in a fasted state.
Oh, 100%. And there's a lot of studies on this, especially in rodents, on like cognitive performance and physical performance, like maze tests and stuff. And the fasted rats are always, way outperforming the fed ones. And I experienced that as well. And you mentioned it, like the mental acuity is there. You don't have the energy swings and the brain fog. And like you said, evolutionarily, it completely makes sense because when you need to be securing food, you can't be you got to be like on top of it. You got to be physically on top of it. You got to be cognitively there. So it all makes sense.
You can't be lethargic and fuzzy if you really need to get food so that you do not die. Like
Nope.
That's pretty straightforward. So in terms of, and I'm with you, like I know that people call them different, but in terms of intermittent fasting and time restricted eating, what are some of the things that we use to compare it to full on calorie restriction? How do we feel this sense of confidence that these are ticking the same boxes or at least some of the important boxes of a full on calorie restriction, which is the thing we're trying to mimic actually?
Yeah. So there's a lot of pathways, a lot of hormones, and a lot of things that happen with calorie restriction, and we see them happening with fasting. So where to start? Because there's just so many. So one of the biggest ones is the AMPK mTOR pathways. So basically, when mTOR is stimulated, it's a state of growth. It's stimulated from the fed state. So you're building muscle. You're basically it's that fueled state, and it's interestingly not actually on the flip side. So AMPK is the flip side of it, which is when you are, doing renewal, breaking down internal proteins, restoring things. That's linked to longevity. mTOR is the opposite. So by activating the AMPK pathway, which is activated, it's related to nutrient sensing. So calorie deprivation activates it, as does fasting. And that creates it's longevity supporting, which is really, really amazing. Things that also are affected, like inflammation goes down. We see that with markers like C-reactive protein, the activation, which I mentioned earlier, of burning ketones and ketosis. That's created by calorie restriction as well as fasting, and that has a really great effect on the mitochondria. So it really optimizes our mitochondria to generate energy, provides consistent fuel source for our bodies. The brain actually can function really, really well on ketones. So we see that with both calorie restriction and with fasting. There's just so many. Oh, autophagy, that's a huge one. So autophagy is basically like a cleanup of your body on the cellular level. It's where your body is not receiving exogenous protein from your food. So it goes in and it finds, old misfunctioning proteins within your body already, breaks them down, recycles them, and uses them. So it's like a really deep clean of your body. And it's just so, so important. Actually, I think, there's like the 9 hallmarks of aging. But now I think it's like 14 hallmarks of aging. Do you know what they are? I know autophagy is now like one of them. So that's activated by both calorie restriction and fasting. Changes in things like IGF-1. So that's a little bit complicated because they'll say that high IGF-1 levels are correlated to longevity, but it's kind of it's probably a spectrum. Like too low IGF-1 is not the best, neither is too high IGF-1. You want like a sweet spot, but in general, an overexpression of IGF-1 would be correlated to, I keep doing it backwards. So low IGF-1 is good for longevity. And so we see that with calorie restriction and with fasting. I mean, there's just so many pathways. There's the activation of things called sirtuins, which if people are interested in lifespan, I really recommend like Dr. David Sinclair's book.
Amazing book.
It's called Lifespan as well. I was like, if people are interested in lifespan.
Yeah. This book is also called Lifespan.
Also called Lifespan. So I've had him on my show and he's amazing. And he talks about sirtuins, which are kind of like, they're activated with things like calorie restriction and fasting. And they're protective. They activate a lot of different processes in the body that help support our, building up our cells and our antioxidant system and just so many things. And so we see that with fasting. So basically, the similarities are really, really there between the two pathways. But like I mentioned earlier, they still are studying, like, is it the exact same thing or is it like slightly different?
Yeah, it's kind of like, and it's a lot of things really in the health, longevity, biohacking space where we've got this A plus B probably usually equals C. So it probably equals C in this case, which is so on full on calorie restriction, so well documented that it extends life. And here are the things that we see, the pathways that we see being triggered that we also know to be associated with longevity. They're triggered in these ways. And then you do intermittent fasting in at least in mice. I know there's more and more studies coming out on humans, but those same pathways are in alignment. And so, yeah, these should be equally effective. Somebody gave me an example, the fact that you do time-restricted feeding of rats, right? And so you get them down to whether 8, 6, whatever the restriction is, so they can only consume as much as they want for 8 or 6 hours. And when you map that to humans, we tend to take the same schedule, but the point was made that period of time that they're fasting because of their metabolic rate is more like us needing to fast 2 or 3 days. And this came onto my radar really recently. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Oh, I think this is huge. So yes. So it's just a big resounding yes. So basically, and it's almost a little bit upsetting because basically all of the fasting studies in mice, time-restricted fasting, time-restricted eating, it's set up, like if you read it, you're like, okay, this is like what a human would be doing, but it's like what you just said, it's the equivalent. So them fasting, 12 hours is the equivalent of like days for us. I wish I need to like have this fact right off the top of my head. I know that, for example, like if they fast a certain amount of time, which is pretty comparable to what we would fast, the amount of body weight they can lose is like a shocking amount. So it's hard to, and I thought about this before, like how would you study the intermittent fasting patterns that we do? How would you study that in rats? I don't even know how you would set that up. Like, I don't know what that eating window would look like for them. But yeah, I think where it really comes into play is people get concerned about fasting's effects on women and hormones and fertility. And a lot of that is looking at rodent studies where it's just not the same thing. It's like these are female rats fasting for days and days and days, seeing fertility issues, or that's not the same thing as a human fasting, for a portion of a day. It's very different.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think we bumped into this as we were trying to present, the research that we kind of hang our hat on for our ESS60 molecule is, 90% extension of life in these rats. And they were given a certain amount. And if you just did a straight milliliters per kilogram translation, and you take, the average size of a human, we would need to be taking I think it's 1.7 cups of olive oil with as much of the molecule in it as you can dissolve. So that's not sustainable, right? 1.7 cups of olive oil a day. No, that's not going to happen. And what it turns out, I had to dig into the research, like, okay, why is this off? And it is metabolism. And there's a calculation called an allometric calculation. Now, I don't know if that applies directly to time scale, right? Like it probably does, because it's how you correlate the different metabolisms of the different animals that you're looking at in, rats and then humans in this case. And so it's probably related to that. And there's a factor, and I don't remember what the factor, there's all sorts of complexity. I'm super geeky. So what's amazing about this is it's related to the surface area of the animal. So if you take the surface area of a rat and that has a ratio with the surface area of a human, that's a great way to kind of equate or understand the correlation between their metabolisms. Super geeky. But then you can do this calculation and you take 1.7 cups and you end at 1 teaspoon. Which is obviously something that's sustainable. So that same calculation is probably what needs to be used, but I don't know. And also, if we go back and we're looking at these pathways, because the only thing that's tying this to calorie restriction is these pathways, the fact that the same pathways that we know are associated with longevity are showing the same markers, then, do we really even need to go any further than this? If we've got the markers and we trust in those markers, do we need to be starving ourselves for more than, for the 2-day or 3-day equivalent of the rats? Have you ever done like full day, multi-day fasts?
Okay, well, so first of all, that's so fascinating I want to learn more about that equation. And you know what it kind of reminds me of? And I'll get to your question. But it reminds me of, like they'll do because I also going back with David Sinclair, and he did a lot of research with resveratrol. So there are all these, study or benefits seen with red wine consumption, but then they'll say like, oh, but you'd have to drink, liters of wine to get that effect. They'll do the same thing with like turmeric. They'll be like, because the active ingredient is curcumin, and they'll say, oh, but you have to get the active amount of curcumin, you'd have to have this amount of turmeric. But if you step back, we're seeing the health benefits from the turmeric and the red wine. So I just feel like something's not quite panning out. Like maybe you don't have to, maybe there's like, when it's synergistically in the full compound, maybe there's more going on that you don't have to have that, that straight correlation of like liters of wine for those effects. But that's a tangent.
But we're willing to try. Like, I mean, that's,
Yeah, I know. Sign me up.
You are enjoying, well, at least I hope you're enjoying the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow, and make sure you share. But don't be that annoying guy, whatever you do. Don't share it with people who aren't actually interested in living beyond the norms.
So you asked me about extended fasting? Was that the question?
Multiple day fasting.
Yeah, so it's so funny. I think I have not done anything super crazy. I think the longest I've done is like 50 hours maybe. But what's interesting is, because I've wanted to do like a 3 day, 4 day, 5 day fast, but I have not. I do think there's a lot of benefits there, but I personally haven't done it. I haven't even done the fasting mimicking diet like Valter Longo's thing. Although I think I actually might be better. Like for me, the idea of eating just a little bit is almost seems harder than eating nothing. Have you done an extended fast?
I have not. And it's kind of on my radar. There's certainly been, I tend to eat lunch at 3 and then a dinner after I get home, and I try and that's usually done by 8:30 or 9. And then before 10, I have what I call I have very much a sweet tooth. So I have this thin veil that stands between me and large desserts. And that thin veil is a little piece of dark chocolate and a little square of milk chocolate. And I'll have that. My goal is to have that before 10. So then from 10 until 3, I'm not eating. But sometimes I don't get to lunch, right? And so you end up with a dinner. Could I skip dinner? Yeah. Like I just don't think that would be a problem. Getting into the 2 days, I certainly have the willpower to do it. Do I want to? Well, I do also have coffee, right? I have coffee with some milk in it every day. And so that's kind of breaking fast technically. And I recently started adding a little bit of protein right after my workouts. But I could do it. It's just I haven't done it. And some of the the testimonials that people will share about doing multi-day fasts are pretty amazing. Resetting the gut, resetting their entire system, their immune system. Like it's pretty impressive and wouldn't surprise me. Like, because you're just telling your body you're about to die and it's going, well, let's unload all the garbage. Let's clean up everything that's not working efficiently. And then you're like, oh, great, we have food again. Like that makes sense that it should be valuable.
Yeah, well, two comments there, especially with the immune system. And this actually goes back to what you were saying earlier about like if A plus B equals C, like that whole thing. So with Valter Longo and his fasting mimicking diet, it's interesting because he's basically studying this fasting mimicking approach, finding these different markers of longevity and lifespan. Then it's like, can you correlate, because it's fasting mimicking, is that the same thing as, just straight up fasting? Can you make all those assumptions? But regardless, he has found really interesting findings with his work on the immune system and basically like just regenerating entire immune systems with the fasting mimicking diet, which is really fascinating. And then to the point about the longer fast. So I think I could do, so you and I are a little bit different than I think, because you were saying skipping dinners, you could do that. I like have to go to bed on a full stomach. I don't sleep well when I'm not full. So really the thing for me with the longer fast, like if I could just stay awake for 5 days, I honestly think I could do it. It's the sleepiness issue for me. So I'm actually really excited because I'm traveling next week to London. I'm going to use that as a time to do an extended fast, because it'll allow me to just like stay up with the travel like really, really long and just not eat. Which, side note, you can use intermittent fasting to combat jet lag. It's a really amazing hack for that. So I highly recommend that. You basically, because eating is so intrinsically tied to the circadian rhythms of like all of our body, including our eating, that you can use fasting to reset your like sleep rhythms. So basically what you would do is you would like when you're traveling to your new destination, you would fast on the way there. So that's what I'm going to do to London. And then you eat in the new time zone to match the new time zone in the way you were doing before. So basically for me, I always eat dinner. So when I eat dinner, my body's like, oh, it's bedtime. So I'll just like fly over there and make sure that I don't eat until dinner there. And then that will reset me. So there's actually studies on this. It's pretty cool.
I wasn't aware that there were studies, and it
Mhm.
certainly makes sense. Like it's tying your circadian rhythm, so makes perfect sense. So you could also incorporate, small quantities. I think people tend to take too much melatonin, but small melatonin is supposed to be really good for resetting that clock in the new time zone. I'll be honest, with my product, my wife and I don't have jet lag problems at all. Like we just
So nice.
don't. It's pretty awesome. Also, I find the eating process on the airplane to be entertaining, and I would struggle to like watch other people eat and then not be eating, and at least at lunch and at the SAG meals, you're used to lunch not skipping lunch and spending the whole time explaining why you're skipping it. Maybe that's what you do on an airplane.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. And the crazy thing with the SAG, like on those sets, if it was like really big budget TV shows or movies, it would be like so much food, like the nicest food ever. Like one set I was on, they had a shrimp ice sculpture. Wow. I'm not making that up. Like, and I would just watch it. Yeah. But it's a muscle. It's a muscle.
We're just gonna just watch the ice melt over the shrimp.
Yep.
What are the benefits of early versus late time restricted? We kind of know your preference, but do you think there's advantage of one over the other? And that's time of day, right? Like early in the day versus late in the day.
Yeah. So I have a lot of thoughts on this. Because basically the messaging out there in the majority of the studies, they'll say that eating earlier is better. Basically you want to eat earlier. Like that's what Dr. Satya Panda finds. Dr. Valter Longo talks about it a lot. That said, there's a few different caveats that I have. One is that there aren't a lot of studies. So a lot of the studies that find issues with eating late are looking at late eating patterns as well as eating throughout the day in addition. So it's like people who are eating throughout the day and eating late, and then they're looking at the eating late part. Like there aren't a lot of studies that look at like fasting and just eating late compared to eating all day or compared to eating early. There's more now, but it's not an overwhelming amount. So I think that's I think it's hard to know, like if you are actually fasting and just eating later, are there actually issues associated with that? And then there's the epidemiological data issue. So they'll say that people who eat breakfast, live longer, or people who skip breakfast have increased mortality. But that could be a lot of confounding factors, especially since we've been told for so long that, eating breakfast is like the healthy thing to do. So it could be like the healthy user bias going on there. It's just hard to know people who are skipping breakfast, like what all else is happening there. So 2 thoughts. One, so I sat down and I was like, I'm just going to like look through the studies, going to try not to be biased and just look at the hormones, when they're released, at what time, and see what seems like when we should be eating. And when I did that, it really seemed like once we wake up is probably not the time to be eating. That's just my opinion from what I saw, because when you wake up, like your cortisol is high. Basically, your body's in a state to go find food. So all of your hormonal profile is not really suited to eating once you wake up. That's just from what I've seen. It's more like a few hours after waking up. And then, throughout the day, I wrote a blog post about this, but basically the hormones that most look like this is when we would be eating, they were around when you're eating, they're around 3-4 o'clock or so. And then that window is still as long as it's light outside. And then, when it's getting dark, you probably shouldn't be eating. So what I'm doing is not in line hormonally, profile wise. All of that said, I have a bigger caveat, which is that let's say that yes, eating earlier is better, which is highly possible. I think people need to take into account their own chronotypes and when they intrinsically feel the best eating, because I think what you stick to is what's more important. So if you feel better eating later and that's what you can do as a consistent time restricted feeding pattern, I would say do that over trying to fit yourself into a box of what you've heard is better. Even same with sleeping. We're told that we need to be early morning people, which I wish I was. I'm if I could like change one thing about myself, I would be like an early morning person.
How early? I just get how early would you wish to?
Would I want to be?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, anything would be better than what I am right now, but probably. I mean, like, I would love to be like an early bird. Like, people get up like 6 a.m. That'd be so cool. I mean, that's like when I go to bed. Not quite.
I don't know if you watch, and I don't even know how I follow him, right? Like, I'm just aware of, like, Mark Wahlberg wakes up at like 4 o'clock in the morning and has, an intense workout that's done before you dream you could wake up. Like, it's just crazy.
See, I would be awake at 4 a.m., so.
Yeah, still.
Yeah.
That's the night owl chronotype. Yeah.
No, are you? What are you?
I think I'm pretty much a night owl. Like, so I wake up, I got to get the kids to school, and then I'll actually come back from that and exercise, and I like my mornings that way. If I need to get up early, I really, like, I don't struggle. I just don't want to do it. Like, it's not my thing. I'm also a snoozer, which is not supposed to be good for you at all. But I really, going back to sleep after the alarm goes off is for at least for me, extremely satisfying. Like, yeah, I know I got to get up, but I'm going back to sleep.
I have a reframe there because I was thinking about that either this morning or yesterday morning, because there is something so precious and magical. Like when you wake up and then you snooze and you're just like basking in that, because it's like you get to actually enjoy the sleep, because normally you're asleep during the sleep. So you're asleep during the sleep. So you're not like appreciating it. But like when you wake up and then you snooze, I think gratitude is so like healthy. So I support your snoozing.
Yeah, I think another perspective, and I'm really having this just right now, is I've always been an incredibly good test taker. And one of the things that I would always do with a test, I got a piece of paper, I got a pen, 3, 2, 1, start. And I wouldn't start for like 2 minutes. And part of that was just like, I'm in control here. Right? Like, just let me express to it whatever every fiber of my own being. And maybe that's what this kind of snoozing is. Yeah, I got to get up, but I'm actually in control here. And so I'm going to get up when I really want to, relatively speaking, compared to when at the last minute that I have to be up. But
that blows my mind. You would do that? Like as a kid?
On tests?
On time tests?
Yeah. No, the first thing you do...
Getting so stressed.
Is don't, yeah. And if you have the mindset to not do anything, right? Because you're not going to get more or less on the paper in those 2 minutes. Like, those 2 minutes don't matter. They matter to me for the mindset of, you know what? It's a test. I'm in control, even if it's not the most efficient thing. In fact, it didn't come from a cocky place of like, I'm in so much control, I don't need the 2 minutes. It came from the self-preservation point of like, you're not going to control me. I'm in control. So it wasn't cockiness. It was control.
Sounds like an evolved child. That's
I did some weird stuff. Yeah. That's for sure. So I try and get those skills to my kids, and
that's
who knows.
I was always the last person to turn in like my paper. Always like the last. Because I would take just
I was probably close to the last. Like that's probably true. And I never regretted the 2 minutes. Like I really never did. But a teacher early on taught me a stress control technique, which is like, one, when you get your test, tighten up all of your muscles and then relax, because you will inherently be more relaxed than when you tightened them. Like, so tighten everything and then relax. And so I was like, well, let me take that to the next level, which was, I'm going to do that, and not for 2 complete minutes, but I'm going to do that as part of this 2 minutes. And I never regretted not taking those 2 minutes, because it's just 2 minutes.
That's so funny. That's amazing. I love that.
And maybe that's what's going on with my snooze. But we digress.
Oh, man.
So next, I wanted to ask: have you ever played around with a continuous glucose monitor?
Oh yes.
Yeah,
I love those. Mm-hmm.
And have you? So what are some? Because I haven't talked to. I feel like I've probably talked to a lot of people who have. I haven't talked to many people about those glucose monitors. What are some of the things that surprised you while you were wearing your glucose monitor?
Yeah. Okay. So.
And which one did you use?
I've always historically been using Nutrisense, which uses the Freestyle Libre.
Does that require a physician's prescription? Is that something?
No. So, yeah, that's why I love partnering with them. So they actually, you can go to their website and they provide the access to the sensors. They send two, and then they have a really awesome app that you can see all your data way more than you would see with the Freestyle app. And then you can also talk with a nutritionist for support. So yeah, it's really great. Yeah, it's awesome. So basically for listeners who are not familiar, a continuous glucose monitor, you wear it on your arm, and it measures 24/7 your interstitial fluid to, by proxy, measure your blood glucose levels. And it gives you a picture of them, constantly. And it's amazing because people will get people will do a glucometer at home, or they'll get their blood glucose tested with their doctor. And that is just a snapshot of that one moment. And they're going back to factors affecting things. There's so many factors that could affect that one moment that it could be really high, and that could be not a false positive, but basically not indicative of what it is normally, or it could be low and also not indicative. So when you have a CGM, you literally see A, what your average blood sugar is constantly, B, how you're reacting to food, to fasting, to exercise. It is so eye-opening. I honestly think if everybody in the world did one because it's 2 weeks, if they just did it once, it would change the metabolic health of our world, I think, because people would now know how things are actually affecting them. And things you may be surprised about, like you were saying. So for me, it kind of, I'm trying to remember the first time I did it, I think it probably lined up with what I was sort of suspecting. But when I wake up, especially with the dawn effect and that bump in cortisol, my blood sugar does bump up higher when I wake up. And it actually stays pretty high, even though I'm fasted. When I say pretty high, I'm talking 90s in the morning, in the day. And then it tends to hit a peak around the afternoon. And then especially I do a daily cryotherapy session every single day. And when I do that, after that, it really starts going down, and then it'll go down, stay pretty consistent until I eat again. And then when I eat, actually, I that was something I was pretty shocked about, was that because now I started by doing low carb and keto and all that, but now I eat really high carb, but all whole foods and all fruit. And I handle that really well. And I see that on the CGM, especially when I started using berberine. I see a really big difference with what I eat. But probably as far as the biggest surprise with fasting would be that you can have, higher blood sugars while fasting. I've seen that with me, especially in the morning with the cortisol response. So yeah, it's so eye-opening. I highly recommend them.
Yeah, it's on my radar, and I know that there are some that you can get with prescription, and I'm actually working on a website called Get Longevity Meds, where you actually be able to get off-label prescriptions, and so now that's on my radar. It got on the radar for metformin, right? That's certainly a longevity drug that people are familiar with, but we'll continue. Maybe it's something, those prescription CGMs that are out there, we might be able to make that available. So it's kind of exciting.
For your website, are you going to have doctors that are prescribing metformin and stuff?
Yeah, that's the plan. Yeah.
Rapamycin?
We took that off the list. It may come back on. They're doing so much research on rapamycin that it could easily get on the radar soon, but that's a pretty contentious one, right? In my understanding, and honestly, we kind of have to do the research, point the doctors in the right direction so that they're comfortable, so then they can do the research so that they're then comfortable to say oh yeah, metformin is probably a decent idea and at least not a dangerous idea. So I'm comfortable prescribing that for people who are interested in it for longevity. And I think rapamycin has this nuance that if you take too much, it's really problematic. And so that's going to make doctors really leery. But it's not off my radar. It's just not on the radar right now.
What about statins?
That also came onto my radar recently. So I ironically give my business partner, we were having health conversations, and he's not as healthy as me. And I gave him a hard time. Dude, you take medication every day. It's a statin. And then 2 days later, I kind of got some new information. I'm like, can I have some? I didn't ask, but it's me giving him a hard time about the medication he's on. And now it's probably a good thing to be taking. That's on our radar.
Oh my goodness. Keep me updated. This is fascinating.
It's cool stuff, right? Like yeah, I'm really excited, and really did that with the co-author of my book, Jerome Corsi, who has a kind of a history of doing telemed services. So it's pretty awesome.
Super cool.
Related
like
to fasting. Say again?
Sorry, it'd be like the Christmas website.
I want this, and I
shop
want
paper.
Can you wrap that in red paper, please? Is there anything, because I have some wrap-up questions, is there anything about fasting or intermittent fasting, and we kind of touched on glucose monitors, that you want to kind of bring, that I didn't ask you the right questions to talk about?
Oh, well, I loved all your questions. I guess I would just say I would really encourage people, if they're new to fasting, to find the fasting pattern that works for them. And maybe that, goes without saying, but especially going to what we were talking about earlier, like early versus late and all these things, like we can have this idea in our head, like of what we think the perfect approach is to anything, but really you've got to find what works for you. That's like the theme of my life. So to start, just ask yourself, what are the meals that typically you normally like eating? Is it breakfast? Is it lunch? Is it dinner? And kind of start there. Make sure that your eating window includes the meals that you like eating. And, you can start small. You can always increase your fasting window. When I started fasting originally, I did do it based on the clock. So I was like, actually, no, I did it based on, I said I had to fast a minimum amount of hours. So I would count the amount of hours I was fasting, and then I could eat after that. And then as I became more comfortable, now I'm much more fluid. I mean, it's always dinner, but I don't count the fasting hours. I don't stress about the clock. If I'm going out to eat dinner, with people earlier than my normal eating window, that's fine. So, I would really encourage people to just find the fasting window that works for them.
That makes sense. And you've said this a couple of times, and it's popped into my head a couple of times. You interviewed Dr. David Sinclair. He's also a single meal faster, I think. At least in his book, I think he said he was.
Yeah, I remember and I love him, by the way, and I've had him on my show a few times. And
I'm a little bit jealous there. I'm not going to lie.
I love him. I do remember him talking about that in the book, but then he also talks about how he takes his NMN with yogurt, and I don't think he counts that.
That's right.
I count that. So
he's a single meal fasting cheater.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what he's doing exactly. But NMN, that's a whole tangent.
Yeah.
NAD. Oh my goodness.
All right. So let's get to kind of our wrap up longevity questions. Do you have a target age that you want to live to?
Forever? So actually, no, I don't have any one age. I will say though, I think it's so interesting. I used to think, I thought everybody wanted to live forever. And then I found out that most people don't. And that kind of blew my mind. Most people I ask if they want to live forever, they're always like, no. And I'm like, oh, I literally thought it was common. I thought everybody wanted to. So I would like to live forever. I'm not putting out I get a lot of these longevity people will be like, I'm going to live until this date. I'm like, that sounds, I don't want to put a number out there because
you have the positive mindset. You don't see Dave Asprey's 180 as a positive. You see it as a limitation. That's pretty cool.
Well, we're also then it's if you, I mean, I guess you're dead, so what would it matter? But then it just, for me, I'm like, that just sets me up to fail. If I don't put a number, then I can't fail.
There we go. And how long do you think that humans can live?
Yeah. Okay. So right now, I don't think we have found the mechanism or the thing that allows us to live past how long supercentenarians live, because it seems that with supercentenarians, there are these people, these unicorns, that they just have the perfect blend of genetics, and it's probably not any one gene, but they have this perfect blend where their body does all of the things that it needs to do to counteract the effects of aging that we have to activate through very conscious decisions like exercise, diet, lifestyle. They just genetically do it. Even them, and I'm sure you probably talked about this on the show, their health span is really good. So they're really good health up until, their supercentenarians are over 110, I guess, and then they just die. So it seems like there's like this cutoff where right now, until we figure that out, I don't know that we'll like live past that, but I feel like the answer could be out there. I mean, we have the immortal jellyfish, so maybe we can figure out what they're doing.
There are some signs in nature. Yeah. I love David Sinclair's kind of thought processes. All right. 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets, let's call them shortcuts because everybody likes shortcuts for longevity and a long health span that you would share.
Yes. And also one really last thing, because you made me think of this one last thing, because I did just interview Dr. Walter Longo again, like I was saying, and he points out that humans, when we have children and we have embryos, we create something that is like completely young. So it is completely possible for our bodies to create something that's completely young. So in theory, maybe we can apply that to everything.
And David Sinclair points out that he could just take a skin cell and clone it, and make a baby Melanie, right? Like that is a reality. Like, I'm sure people are doing it. Maybe not. No one's doing it. It's going to happen, right? We're already doing that with animals. So his point is that inside of every cell in your body is the information, the knowledge, the levers to make a baby you. And so we just got to figure out how to. We don't want to jump from here to baby. We want to roll back those, find the right levers and roll it back slowly. So.
Or I was reading last night about stem cells, and they've been able to take the Yamanaka factors and apply it to stem cells and basically make them like embryonic stem cells. So like reverse age them. So there's the possibility. I just don't know that it's like right now we're like swimming in the mechanisms of individual things. And it's like, how do you apply that to the whole system? I don't know. So you said 3 things about like longevity promoting.
Shortcuts for longevity and a long health span.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the first thing would be anything, and this kind of goes into my whole biohacking world, anything that you can do to not to make your life uncomfortable, but to make our modern life is so sedentary. It's indoors. We're not exposed to these hormetic stressors, which are very longevity promoting. So anything you can do to make your physical environment mimic that environment that we had as, hunter-gatherers. So things like heat and cold exposure. I do like daily cryotherapy and daily sauna. I think that's huge. Not moving around constantly, the fasting. So anything you can do where you're creating that hormetic stress, I think is so, so important. Second thing I think would be, I mentioned this earlier, I just think mindset is so, so powerful. So I think gratitude is huge. Like just living with gratitude and kindness, I think is really, really profound, especially because like the fear state is, cortisol promoting. I know we talked about hormetic stress being beneficial, but the psychological effects of chronic stress and the mental approach to that, I think is very aging. So reframing that with, gratitude, I think cannot be underestimated. And then I had a third one.
While you're thinking of that, I've read, I think it was a study, and I don't know the details of the study, but it talked about the mindset around stresses. If you see stresses as stressful, then they're detrimental. If you see stresses as beneficial, right? So I'm under a little bit of stress trying to interview 48 people for this longevity summit. There is a lot going on. And in every moment, I'm going, this is great. Like, this is, yes, it's stress. I'm a little bit tired, but this is great. That makes it a positive stress. And it's actually the mindset about the stress. It's not the stress itself.
100%. I think it's like Kelly McGonigal's book, The Upside of Stress. I think I've read that book like 3 times. It's all about what you just said, which is basically that how you perceive stress affects physiologically how it affects you. So that was a really game changer to read, because I definitely went through a period of time where I was stressed. I would stress about being stressed, which doesn't help anything. So yeah, that's really powerful. So probably the third thing, and it's like a few different things, so maybe I'll try to like weave them together into one thing. But basically, I think people like actually I have 2 different ones and they're different.
You're allowed four. We'll allow you to have four.
They're kind of similar. So one is, I think, really taking agency with your health. So you are not defined. We talked earlier about genetics, and we talked about, super centenarians who have these magical genetics, but you are not, like, epigenetics is so powerful. So your diet, your lifestyle, your environment, your mindset, you can take agency with your health and longevity. So the choices that you make, doing regular testing, doing blood work, seeing how things affect you, wearables like Oura Ring, where you can, see your sleep and see your stress and see your activity levels. I just think people can have agency in their longevity and their health conditions. Even things like autoimmune conditions, can be radically affected by your diet and lifestyle. And then the other one is that I think feeling empowered to do what, and this sounds really vague, but do what you love in life, I think is so huge, especially with things like cognitive decline, like just how highly correlated that is to people's jobs and their sense of purpose and what they're doing. I think using cognitive decline is like a really good example of looking at, aging. So doing what you love, taking agency and doing it, and at the same time having boundaries. So knowing how to say yes to what you want to say yes to and saying no to things, I think is so powerful, because if you're chronically stressed and burning it at both ends, that's, a quick road to burnout and not longevity. So doing what you love, saying yes and no to what you should be doing, having warm boundaries, all of that.
So follow your passion and purpose and say no.
Yes. And say no. I know saying no is so great.
That's good. All right, Melanie, how can people contact you?
Sure. So first of all, again, thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun. I feel like there's so many rabbit holes we could have gone on.
Yeah. No, I was like, no, let's not go down.
I know. I have to
let's trip over that one to skip the next one and then stay on course.
Yeah. So I am Melanie Avalon on all the social media. So Instagram. My website is melanieavalon.com and ifpodcast.com. You can join me in my Facebook group. I have 3, but the main one is called IF Biohackers. If you just type Melanie Avalon on Facebook, you can join me there. It's a really amazing community. You can get all of my supplements at avalonx.us. I formulated them to be, it's basically, I just wanted to be taking the highest quality supplements of what I was already taking myself without problematic fillers, tested for purity and potency, glass bottles. So I'm making everything that I want to be taking. So you can get that there. And I think that's probably, all the places. So.
All right. What in the near future are you excited about?
So many things. Life is so amazing. So many things. Probably the 2 biggest things right now, I'm launching a EMF blocking product line. So I'm very excited about that. That's going to be called Avalon X as well, but it's going to be powered by SYB, which is Shield Your Body. They're an EMF blocking company. And my big project that we have our 2 final calls tomorrow to find our developer, but I'm going to be creating a dating app. I'm so excited about that.
What is that going to have, like a health focus, like healthy dating app, or what is that?
So I want it to be, just like any mainstream dating app. But if you think about it, there's not a mainstream dating app where you can filter by diet, and food is just so important to people, not just healthy. Because like originally I was like, I want to make like a paleo dating app. I want to make a fasting. I want to make a carnivore. But if you go on dating apps, like seriously, half the people on there are like, it's like, what do you love? Like, it's like fill in your profile, and they're like tacos and pizza. So like there needs to be a dating app where people like standard American diet food lovers can find each other, as can paleo, as can carnivores. So it'll be just a normal dating app, but you'll be able to filter by diet. So.
That makes a lot of sense, because if you only eat dinner, and like if you ended up with a significant other who only ate breakfast, like that's going to present challenges like that are probably equal or worse than the cultural challenges that people sometimes experience depending on their significant other. That's fascinating. That's cool. I'm excited for that.
Thank you. Yeah, and even like people like vegans, I know they often like to be with fellow vegans, or like carnivore people and carnivore people. So I think there's so much potential there. So
that's very cool. All right. You can find her at melanieavalon.com. That's MELANIEAVALON.com. You can also find her at ifpodcast.com. That's for intermittent fasting. And then search on Google for Melanie Avalon or IF Biohackers. You've got a group on Facebook that's IF Biohackers. Is that right?
That is correct.
This was so much fun. Melanie, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris. This was amazing. I can't wait to hang out more in the future and talk about all the things.
We'll do it again.
Awesome. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.